So it's officially been 20 days since Metroid Prime Remastered was announced at the last Nintendo Direct, and then of course Shadow dropped on the eShop immediately following that Nintendo Direct, and since then, everyone's been in love with the game. They're praising the game. It's got some of the best reviews we've seen in the Switch generation. I myself, as a Metroid fan, am just so happy about this because, as a lot of you know, the original game, the original release on the GameCube, is my personal favorite game of all time, and I have just been flat out floored at the high quality of this remaster/remake of this release. Now, as we all know, alongside of the Shadow drop on the Nintendo eShop, there was a physical version of Metroid Prime Remastered also announced at the Nintendo Direct, which was incredibly exciting for those of us that like physical games or want to add a new physical Metroid game to our collection. And to our surprise, the date for the physical version of the game was only 2 weeks after the announcement of the game. It was such a crazy and exciting and unheard of thing to see, especially for a series like Metroid that struggled to really get its name and popularity out there. But as I discussed on the video, and as a lot of people have learned the hard way, finding these physical editions now that we're a week beyond the release of the physical editions, at least in North America, has been extremely hard, and scalpers have taken over, and they're selling for upwards of over $100 on eBay and on online sites, and people haven't been able to find them in stores in their local towns, or they haven't gotten their online orders, which includes me. I'm still waiting for mine, although my release date, or my ship date, has actually moved up to this coming weekend, and so I'm really hoping to finally get my freaking hands on this thing. But it's been such a weird, chaotic mess, and it's strange. You know, I discussed it in my video on this topic, how very strange it is that Nintendo chose this 2-week window for digital and physical release, and then they weren't even able to meet the demand of the physical product anyway, which, while it's a negative and a bummer for people who are looking for this game, and it also kind of shows that Nintendo maybe dropped the ball, I also discussed in my video that there's kind of a silver lining to this whole issue of people finding copies, because it shows that the demand for Metroid, and specifically Metroid Prime, is higher than even Nintendo thought. Now, before I move on to really the main thesis of this topic in this video and this conversation about how well Metroid Prime Remastered might end up selling at the end of the day, it is worth noting that Nintendo has now finally commented on the lack of availability and confirmed that they're working to replenish stock and get this game out to people who want the physical copies in their hands and in their Nintendo Switches. Nintendo Life actually reached out to them about this, and they just finally made an update that Nintendo did respond with a comment, and here is what they said. "We will do everything we can to meet the strong demand for the product. Please continue to check with major retailers for availability. If the Metroid Prime Remastered game sells out at various retail locations in the US, we will work to provide more units as soon as possible." So this statement and what Nintendo is saying here is really fantastic for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, it's just letting everyone know, hey, you're going to be able to get a copy. Secondly, it's going to really curve the people out there who are trying to scalp this game and sell it for like $100 or $150, and hopefully just squash that whole stupid scalping situation in the bud. And then on top of that, it also kind of confirms that this game was never really meant to be a limited release, or at least intended to be like a small volume limited release, like something like maybe the Mario 3D All-Stars that some people have drawn some comparisons to since this whole thing started to go down. Nintendo is basically saying, our bad, we made a mistake, or the demand is higher than we realized. They even literally said, we're trying to meet the strong demand for the product. And so some people might have been trying to scalp it for the reasons of thinking this was supposed to be a limited release that people would struggle to find. And Nintendo's saying, no, that's not the case. Our bad. Now we realize how many people want this game, so we're just going to make more and we're going to get it replenished. Again, they literally say, if you can't find it, you know, at your local store, if it's sold out, don't worry, because we're going to make more and get it out to people. That is an incredibly positive statement from Nintendo, acknowledging what's happening with this game and with this franchise, and saying we don't want people scalping it. We're not trying to keep physical copies out of your hands. We're happy for the people who downloaded it, but we also want to get this thing into folks' hands and it's a great thing to see. It means Nintendo is seeing and acknowledging that Metroid the franchise and Metroid Prime Remastered specifically is a very hot commodity. People care about it and they want to buy it. Now, after that whole preamble about the current state of the physical copy of Metroid Prime Remastered and its inability to be found in stores and online, and now Nintendo Life's update from Nintendo about what they're doing, we can kind of move on to the other main thing that I really wanted to discuss in this video. And it's if we're potentially seeing signs that Metroid Prime Remastered could end up becoming the best-selling Metroid game, the best-selling Metroid product of all time. Now, in order to do this, it would need to outsell Metroid Dread. That's the very fascinating thing about this whole situation, right? Is Metroid Prime Remastered, it is a remake slash remaster of a 20-year-old game, but it's also the newest Metroid release. And on top of that, this newest Metroid release is also coming only a year and a half after the last new Metroid release, which itself became the best-selling Metroid game. So we're in this incredible renaissance for Metroid and for people's reception and willingness to purchase the franchise more so than we've ever seen. It's the perfect renaissance for the perfect franchise that deserves it. And so Metroid Dread coming out and being a great game, satisfying the fans, reviewing spectacularly, getting nominated for Game of the Year, and also becoming the best-selling Metroid video game of all time, a franchise that itself is over 35 years old, that's an incredible win. And now we're just getting a remaster of one of Metroid's most famous releases, and it's showing signs of being able to duplicate Metroid Dread's success. And because of that, although, to be fair, it's way too early for any of us to tell, I absolutely think there's a chance that we might see Metroid Prime Remastered overtake Metroid Dread sales. There's, of course, a couple of reasons why I think this might actually happen. And one of them is because, I touched on it already here and I mentioned it in my last video. Metroid Prime really is, maybe alongside of Super Metroid, the most famous of all the Metroid games, right? Everyone who's a Metroid fan knows all the games and can tell you the history and the legacy and the quality of all of them. But a lot of folks who aren't Metroid fans or Metroid diehards at least know of the games Super Metroid and the game Metroid Prime. They are famous games with a very strong positive legacy. In fact, they're kind of those two Metroid games that even non-Metroid fans, most of them would have played one, if not both of those two games specifically, Super Metroid and Metroid Prime. So right off the bat, Metroid Prime as a title just brings with it an incredibly strong legacy that I think got people really excited to play it, possibly more than even Metroid Dread. A new Metroid game that was 2D, and I mean, let me just clear one thing up. I freaking love Metroid Dread. I made 3 review videos on that game. It's like a 9.8 out of 10 to me. It's not my favorite Metroid game, but it's in my top 3. The game is a masterpiece. But when we look at the larger gaming space and the larger gaming audience, Metroid Dread was a new game in a franchise non-Metroid fans might not have really cared about, right? And it was a sequel to Metroid Fusion, which is a game most of those folks wouldn't have played. And being a 2D game, even though it's true to Metroid's roots, and that makes it very good, it might be less appealing to a larger, wider gaming audience. So then you take the other most famous Metroid game, Metroid Prime, that's in 3D. It's a first-person game, which is always a popular genre. It's famous in its own right, and you make it more beautiful than anything we've ever seen the Switch produce. Man, there's a lot working in Metroid Prime Remastered's favor. The other thing, on top of all of those bullet points, that also I think works in this game's favor to potentially make it the best-selling game of all time, is their incredibly brilliant structure of shadow dropping it during a Nintendo Direct. That did wonders for the buzz and hype surrounding this game, and I think that the percentage of digital downloads of Metroid Prime Remastered compared to physical sales is going to be way, way higher than even Metroid Dread's. I think the jury is still out on if Nintendo made this a calculated decision knowing it was going to work so well in the game's favor, or if this is just an accidental byproduct of a decision they made to just not really care so much about the game, just shadow drop it after the Nintendo Direct, and we'll make a couple thousand physical copies 2 weeks later. Maybe that's what happened, and they didn't realize the lightning in a bottle situation they had, or they just knew this was going to work out in the game's favor. Either way, what this shadow drop situation did was it created this unbelievable FOMO, right? This like incalculable fear of missing out that Metroid and non-Metroid fans alike just gravitated towards. And I also made a video about this in the last week or so about why the shadow drop situation about this game online was actually a brilliant decision and added so much more buzz and interest around this game than I think it would have had if they just did the normal marketing and promotional cycle, right? Where they just announced it and then 6 months later you can just buy it digital or physical. Doing what they did, again, whether it was an accident or a brilliant marketing decision, I think worked so well in its favor that, again, all of these other bullet points I listed about the game being, beautiful, about it being a first-person 3D game as opposed to a 2D game, Metroid Prime being a famous game with a very strong legacy, and then you add into the fact that the shadow drop probably tripled the digital sales for this game the very day it was announced. I just think that, again, even though it's way too early for us to tell and who knows when we'll finally get the sales numbers, I think there's a chance, because of these reasons, that this game could sell over 3 million copies on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, Metroid Dread benefited from the fact that the Nintendo Switch, at the time Dread came out, what did it have? Maybe like 100 million units? I don't remember what the sales total was in 2021 when Dread came out. And the hype for Dread was massive, so I don't want to undersell that. I mean, that was an amazing 6-month period from reveal to release for Metroid Dread. Boy, I was just living for it. But, the Switch had a massive install base. It was around 100, 105 million or something like that at the time that Metroid Dread released, and it benefited from that. And that's why it was able to sell 3 million copies in its first 6 months and become the best-selling Metroid game of all time. Now, we don't know where the sales totals rest right now. My personal guess is between 3.2 and 3.5 million. Tough to say, so this is just my guess, but if we go on that 3.2, 3.3 total right now, we then apply that number to Metroid Prime Remastered. And with all of these points I've listed out here, and my own personal gut feeling, I'm trying to just not be that Metroid Prime fanboy that's, being led by my emotions here, but I just think that this game, Prime Remastered, can sell more than 3 million copies in its life, maybe even in its first year. Between the shadow drop and the unbelievable hype around downloading it day one, and now the people trying to buy physical copies, once Nintendo really gets this game replenished and people buy even more physical copies, I think the sales numbers are going to really surprise a lot of people. Of course, at the end of the day, I don't think this game has to outsell Metroid Dread, and I don't think it has to become the best-selling Metroid game of all time to still be seen as a monumental success. It's a monumental success right now because of the hype and the number of people downloading it when it was shadow dropped, and the insane story and situation about people buying the physical copies like crazy, and those of us who are still struggling to find them and waiting for the day we can finally buy a copy. It's creating this demand for the physical copy that is extremely strong. I don't want to believe that it's manufactured scarcity from Nintendo. I want to believe they were just caught with their pants down, and it truly is my guess. If it's a manufactured scarcity thing and they knew what was happening and they kept it limited on purpose, that would make me pretty upset because I think it's kind of skeezy to do something like that. But this doesn't feel like what happened here. Nintendo did that with like the Super Nintendo Classic and things like that. And they even tried to do it with Mario 3D All-Stars, even though we know it backfired because that game is readily available. I don't think that's what they did here, though. This, to me, feels like a genuine scenario where they just shadow dropped it, said 2 weeks later you can buy a physical copy if you want, and I think they're surprised at how many people really wanted this game, which then just created even more scarcity because scalpers decided to just circle like vultures and start gobbling these things up and posting them online for $100 like a bunch of freaking idiots. Anyway, I gotta calm down. I'm letting my emotions get the most of me when it comes to the scalping thing because I hate scalpers and I hate that that's part of the kind of the commerce around video games nowadays and the online world that we live in. It's so frustrating, and I hate to see it happening with, again, my favorite game of all time, that I just want as many people to have access to and play the way they want to, whether it's digital or if it's physical, And of course, we're not even talking about the fact that a lot of folks are even double dipping on this game. I am absolutely double dipping. I downloaded the game day one and played through it, but I also want that physical copy, so instead of spending $40 on it, I'm spending $80. And that's my choice. Nintendo's not forcing anyone's hands. That's just how Metroid fans feel about this franchise. But it adds even more to the sales potential of this game. And I just am so thrilled to be here at the beginning of 2023 talking about a re-release of my all-time favorite game that I don't think will ever be topped, and seeing the world just lose its mind with excitement over the fact that this game exists, and almost no one has been disappointed with the quality. We've never seen graphics this good on the Switch, and the game is 20 years old. It shows how much love and care they put into rebuilding this game's visuals. It's incredible. I think it's setting up Metroid Prime 4 for even bigger success whenever we finally see that game. And so hopefully we get those sales numbers soon and people get the physical copy of Metroid Prime in their hands.